Hi, and welcome to COVID Comeback. Tonight, we are covering your mental health and emotional health as it relates to making a comeback from COVID-19. My name is Lauren Davis, and I have the great privilege of supporting our team at Norton Healthcare, who is caring for patients in our community and beyond. We know that for anyone who has had COVID, cared for a loved one with COVID, those in the medical field, and just about all of us, no matter how it's impacted you, this pandemic has had some impact on us all when it comes to our emotional mental health. The day-to-day of it has affected us all at some point or another. At Norton Healthcare, we are dedicated to providing support for your mind, body, and your spirit. So that includes that emotional and mental health component. So we're here tonight to do just that, and our speakers are ready to do that. We're excited to welcome Nicole Ryan as our first presenter tonight. Nicole is a nurse practitioner with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Doctorate of Nursing Practice in Psych Mental Health. She has been with Norton Healthcare in nursing since 2008 in a neuro intensive care unit and our emergency departments. Most recently, she served in the Norton Brownsboro intensive care unit from 2012 to 2020. But currently, she sees patients as a nurse practitioner in the Norton Behavioral Medicine practice as a psych mental health nurse practitioner. Nicole is a mother of 5 children, ranging from 2 to 16. She's got a really big gap there. She coaches soccer and runs a working farm with horses and chickens. She is one busy lady, but tonight she's giving us her time and her expertise. So let's get started with Nicole.
No, thank you for the introduction and everything. So as she said, I currently work for Norton Behavioral Medicine as a psych nurse practitioner, seeing patients through mainly telehealth. And I wanted to just discuss kind of tonight my approach to how I look at behavioral medicine and kind of what is behavioral medicine. So really behavioral medicine encompasses multiple disciplines. That can be a combination of a primary care doctor, nurses, dietitians, health educators, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, and we're really looking at the patient with a full mind and body approach, meaning that we are looking at 100% of that patient. For many years, physical and mental health have been really siloed, and your family practitioner did not talk to a psychiatrist, they gave you a referral, and then there was no loop back communication at all. So really what we're trying to do with behavioral medicine through Norton's is looking at the patient as a whole and really providing that loop feedback conversation with a primary care doctor so that we can all work together to better the health of the patient. We also are looking at social determinants and external factors. So looking at emotional stability, economic stability. How is the patient living right now? What is their access to food? What is their money situation? How is their healthcare access? Do they have the education and really the equity to be able to be an advocate for themselves and everything in this? And so COVID has really brought to light a lot of these external factors and instabilities in these patients. So kind of some basic prevalence of mental health. We're looking at the disease burden right now is rising. Even this is statistics before COVID even happened. So you're looking at those that are 18 or older having some kind of mental health concern. Even from 2008 to 2019, it increased significantly. And then if you look at the young adults from 18 to 25, the increase is even more significant. But of those patients that do have a mental illness, 70% of them are being diagnosed and treated by primary care. These are primary care physicians that are not specialized. Now, they do a wonderful job of managing these patients, but really you're talking about that they're fitting in mental health along with looking at all of these patients' physical conditions as well. Many of these are really difficult to treat. You're talking about mental health, substance use that are many times intertwined with physical health conditions. So you're trying to look at, how does heart disease affect depression? Kind of the chicken or the egg, which one came first? And so with behavioral medicine, we're really looking at both of them. And in combination, how do they affect one another? How is it that if we treat a patient's depression, how does that improve their ability to manage their diabetes? You know, if they have more motivation to get out, to do exercise and stuff, does that significantly increase overall their health? And then so also when you talk about mental health, access is really limited. Only 25% of patients who have a mental health condition receive effective treatment. Many times these patients are seen in ERs, convenient cares. They're walking in and out of a mental health, community mental health situation. And there's not a lot of follow-up or follow-through with these. So Norton Behavioral Medicine opened back in August of 2019 to really provide the collaborative mental health care services to Norton primary care offices, as well as the specialty patients. So we typically have patients that are come through a referral process through either a Norton primary care or one of our specialty practices. For instance, pulmonary, the long-term COVID care clinic, neurology, some of the cancer patients that have resolved their cancer issues then get transitioned over to us. And we provide services as far as therapy, medication management, and then we also have an addiction medicine side underneath of the behavioral medicine. So currently we have, within our practice, we have one psychiatrist, one psychologist, two mental health NPs, 7 licensed social workers, and 1 addictionologist. So when we look at COVID, I chose this wording specifically because it really has been a roller coaster of emotions. We have dealt with COVID now for almost 2 years. If you look at the first case in the United States was back in January of 2020. That's 2 years from right now. And if you look at just the roller coaster of emotions that we've been on, we had the first case, everything shut down. Everyone was isolated. That's whenever we were worried about patients the most. We thought that when everybody went home and was isolated, you know, you lose that personal connection. Everybody started doing things on Zoom. You don't have the personal touch. We were afraid to touch each other. We were afraid to hug each other out of fear for catching COVID. And you have to look at what does that do to us emotionally whenever you don't have that physical connection. And so that's why I put some of these in here, because really, you know, we've gone from the first case to rising numbers. And then you're constantly, it's in the news. It's on all over social media. The number of cases on a daily basis, the number of deaths, the number of hospitalizations. Oh, there's a new variant. Are things opening up? Are they not? All of this causes really a toxic stress. And so it's that chronic stress level that is really doing havoc on everyone's mental health. We have had a significant increase in patients since March, since everything started opening back up, in patients that sought treatment for anxiety. Right now, in the Louisville area, you're looking at most of the time to get into a therapist at a 2-month wait list. We don't have enough therapists to begin with, but that wasn't that way before COVID. And it, you know, while it's a great positive that people are seeking treatment right now, it really brings to light how significant this roller coaster has been for everyone. So I was going to look at some of the positives from COVID, though. Really, we have seen some positives from it. It's really brought the topic of public health to the forefront. In general, we have opened up. We have got thousands, if not millions of dollars towards public health, towards education of the public health setting. And so we've also gotten a significant ability to do telehealth. When we opened Norton Behavioral Medicine, our intent was to do the majority of our patients via telehealth. And that topic was foreign, even in Norton, as big as a system as we are. And amazingly, we went into the pandemic and all of these doors opened up. If you look at from a business standpoint, businesses no longer are traveling. They're doing video conferencing of meetings, and all of, world-renowned specialists are able to meet and to conference on things. You have colleges that are able to use world-renowned scientists from across the world to help teach classes. All of these things have been brought about because we were aiming and we were kind of heading that direction before COVID, but this kind of pushed that envelope that we had to do things this way. And so that's really been a positive, especially within healthcare. We have patients now that I can see a patient on telehealth from home. I can see them from work. I can see them from sitting in their car while they're taking a lunch break. They no longer have to take a whole day off or a part of a day off. Many bosses are perfectly fine with a patient saying, hey, I'm going to go to my car for lunch for 30 minutes and doing their visit with me. So I think it's really opened up the access to care as well. And then it's really opened up, if you look at the advances in science, collaboration between scientists across borders, it's opened up the collaboration all the way across the world in being able to come up with, how do we treat COVID? What do we do with this? Lastly, on the positives, I really think it's increased empathy. COVID has touched each and every single one of us. It doesn't matter whether you have had COVID, whether you know somebody that had it, you've had a loved one or a friend even get hospitalized or perhaps die from COVID. We're all in this together, and that's really increased everyone's empathy for each other across the board. So while that's the positives, then we look at the negatives. When you look at this, overall, when everything shut down, patients stopped getting preventative care. They stopped going to the primary care doctor to get their colonoscopy, to get their routine lab work and everything. And then you have the isolation, as I talked about before. The lack of personal touch really does a lot for just our mental wellness and the ability to socialize with other people. Many times, a lot of our emotions are bounced off of other people. And so without that connection, we lost a lot of that. The overall fatigue from this emotional roller coaster. And then the inequalities, looking across races, wealth status, anywhere from lack of access to care, different vaccine inequalities. You talk about from one country to another, even from rural area in Kentucky to a larger city, and then the loss of loved ones. So one of the things that we really have dealt with is the loss of loved ones. We've lost loved ones. We've also lost our ability to socialize. We've lost sometimes our lifestyle, our jobs, and everything. And so we have to look at that we're all in some sort of one of the stages of grief and loss. And it can be about any of those things that we've lost during COVID. And really, we have to understand that no matter what that loss has been, it's important. It's important that you give yourself the time to go through these processes. There's not any right or wrong way to go through these stages of grief. There's not a set time frame. Everybody goes through them in their own way. And so you just have to give yourself the ability to do that and realize that these are normal processes that you're going through because of that loss. And then, so how do we treat this? What do we do about all of these things and all of the negative effects? So really, a large part of our practice, we're looking at education. What are your symptoms? How to identify what is a mental health condition. So anxiety, many times patients come to us and don't even realize that they have anxiety. It can be a chronic worry. I have patients that come to me and say, I'm just irritable. I lash out at my kids because they're too loud. They're laughing too long. And sometimes that's just anxiety and the stress building up. Sometimes it can be your mind racing, an inability to calm down, kind of a restlessness inside, or an inability to sit still. Depression can be a combination of diminished interest, crying, isolating, irritability as well, changes in sleep or appetite, and then panic attacks. Patients will come to us, and many times they've been to the ER a couple times, and then they've been because they think they're having a heart attack. And then they go to the ER, and after the multiple visits, the ER doctor finally says, maybe it's a panic attack. But the problem is, a panic attack is a mental health condition that carries a huge stigma with it. You know, we've made huge strides in removing that stigma, but for the most part of the population, mental health still carries a huge stigma. So many times, walking patients through what is a mental health condition is really helpful. So when it comes to panic attacks, you're looking at your heart racing, that severe anxiety, upset stomach. It can be nausea, vomiting. It can be shortness of breath, feeling like you're choking or like an elephant sitting on your chest. All of those heart attack symptoms as well. And then really looking at PTSD. Overall, these are the 4 main topics that we treat in Norton Behavioral Medicine, with PTSD probably being one of the highest incidents. And you're looking at what does that traumatic experience that you've suffered, how are you handling that? Did you handle it? Is it that it was so traumatic your brain couldn't handle it at that time? And so many times you end up with hypervigilance, or really kind of always being on edge. It can be flashbacks, kind of intrusive thoughts. It can be a negative image or blaming yourself. And really, sometimes it can even be having an inability to have a positive emotion. So this is a large part of what we do is we're teaching patients about mental health, how to identify what these symptoms are. And I feel like many patients that have had COVID many times have these symptoms. But the problem is that so many times they overlap with physical symptoms. And so I think this is where many times patients make it to us after they've had all of the physical symptoms kind of ruled out. As I said, if you've been to the ER a couple of times thinking you're having a heart attack, everything checks out from a physical standpoint, then the mental health kind of comes at the end. And so I think that also adds to the stigma of, oh, well, physical health gets all of the huge, you go to the ER, everyone runs in and takes care of you. But then if it's a mental health condition, even from the ER, you're given a list of providers and said, here, call one of these people and see if they can help you. So really, a lot of the treatment comes into that education part. If you look at the treatment, though, and looking at it really from a whole person, we also do a lot of treatment and looking at the patient's physical well-being. Are you doing that preventative wellness? Do you have a primary care doctor that's following you? Are you physically active? I don't like the word exercise because I think it comes with a negative connotation too, but our bodies are meant to be in motion. So many times we tell patients, take a walk around the block. Just get up and walk around. Sometimes just getting that physical energy out is really good for your mental health. Also, having a well-balanced diet. I tell patients all the time, if you don't give yourself fuel, it doesn't work. So you have to have that well-balanced diet. You have to be eating on a regular basis. You also have to be sleeping. One of the first things in my intake that I ask patients once I get through their symptoms that they're currently having is I ask, how are you sleeping? Not only how are you sleeping, I want to know all the details. How much are you sleeping? How many hours are you sleeping? How many times do you wake up at night? Do you feel well rested in the morning? Are you snoring? Do we need to get you checked for sleep apnea possibly? All of those things. Many times if we treat a patient's sleep and you're actually getting a good quantity of the right quality of sleep, many of your anxiety symptoms diminish. You feel better overall. So some of the other things that we teach patients is basic hygiene. Well, it seems like that would be a just kind of an ideal thing that everybody does. Many times with depression, that's how we quantify depression. If a patient comes to me and says, well, I'm sad. Okay, I can have a patient that's sad, that's functional, that's going to work, that's still living a life, still taking care of their kids and everything. Or I can have a patient that reports the same level of sadness to me who isn't showering. When I start asking, they're showering maybe once a week. They're not doing laundry. They're not going to work, or they're not going to college classes. So many times these physical well-being parts actually can tell me a lot about the mental wellness and everything in their mental health conditions. And then relaxation, which leads into some of our therapy techniques that we use a lot of times. Many times whenever we're talking about treating mental health, we are teaching patients good coping skills. In life, we don't learn good coping skills. It's not a class in school. It's not something that's taught in elementary school or high school or anything. And many times the maladaptive coping skills, or the coping skills that help you survive but don't really benefit you at all, are what we pick up. So in therapy, we're trying to teach patients better coping skills that are actually beneficial to you. This can be a combination of relaxation techniques. One of my favorites is progressive relaxation, and it actually walks you through relaxing different portions of your body, which helps you to be able to figure out sometimes, are you carrying the stress in your neck? Is that why you're getting headaches? Because your muscles are so tense. Are you doing breathing exercises? Sometimes just taking deep breaths for a minute actually stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system and can lower your anxiety and stress or panic attack. Grounding techniques. The 5-4-3-2-1 model. If you're having high anxiety and you're starting to feel out of control, we use grounding techniques to help really ground you, to help you understand where you're at and kind of focus your mind back in. So the 5-4-3-2-1 is looking at 5 things you can see around you, 4 things that you can touch. So that could be the texture on the chair next to you, something like that. 3 things you can hear, and really focusing on those things. Maybe it's the hum of your computer. Maybe it's somebody talking next door in the next office over. 2 things that you can smell, and 1 emotion that you can feel right now. And then we use also meditation or journaling, motivational interviewing, really looking at how do we teach patients how to manage their anxiety or their depression without meds? Because that is always our goal, is to minimize the number of medicines, the milligrams of the amount of medicine you're on, and the time that you're on it, so that we are teaching patients to manage their symptoms. So that leads into the medicines. Many times it does require at least a little medicine to help get patients up and over the hump of depression or anxiety. So that's the SSRIs or serotonin medicines, SNRIs. Those are medicines like Prozac, Zoloft, Wellbutrin, Effexor, Cymbalta. But we're looking at low dose medicines to minimize the severe symptoms. We don't want to get a patient to where you're not having any emotions, because we negate your ability to do any of the therapy component to it. That really is going to be the root cause, or root treatment, that then sustains you. And we can take you off the medicines. Sometimes we use beta blockers, managing panic symptoms. Propranolol is one that I use frequently because it allows patients, again, to not have an activation of your fight or flight nervous system. You don't get a dump of adrenaline. And so you can manage the anxiety with some of our therapy techniques. Sometimes we use sleep modulators to help patients get to sleep. That can be anything from a natural supplement like melatonin to something like trazodone that helps you get to sleep, that really manages that sleep hygiene and gets you back into a good routine of how do we get you sleeping. Because your body is naturally releasing hormones and substances to help you sleep, but our habits override those. So many times we can treat a patient for sleep for a couple months with medicine, be able to get them back in a better routine, and then take them off of the medicine. And then, as I said, some of the natural supplements. We have many patients that don't want to be on medicines, and that's okay. We meet the patient where they are at that time. So we can treat with natural supplements. We can treat with therapy only. I've had numerous patients that said, I don't want medicine. So I educate them on what the options are, how medicine might help, but they do therapy only for a while. Some of them do fine with that. Some of them come back around in a couple months and are like, well, maybe we need to talk about medicine again, because they find out that the severity of their symptoms is prohibiting them from doing the therapy. And so a little touch of medicine is all they need to help do the therapy. So in conclusion, I think my biggest thing is to acknowledge and give credit to what you've been through the last 2 years. Many times we are really good at shoving all of this down. Oh, it's not that bad, or oh, it hasn't affected me. But in the long run, with the way our media is, the ever social media, our phones, everything, we are constantly bombarded with everything that's going on around us. And it does affect us. So if you are struggling, reach out for help. Don't let the stigma of mental health, or the ability to, and people say to you, well, just get over it. It's not that. Mental health is the same thing as a physical health condition. I tell patients frequently, if you would go to the doctor because your knee hurt, then come to the doctor because you're frustrated or you're depressed. Get help for that. Give yourself the empathy and grace that others would. Many times we are our own worst enemy. We are really good at talking down to ourselves and even saying to ourselves, oh, get over it, or oh, it's okay, where you wouldn't make those statements to somebody else. So give yourself that empathy and grace as well. And then focus on the future. It's many times we get stuck in the here and now, and we dwell on where we're at right now, instead of really maintaining a future focus that helps give us the drive to reach for new things, or to reach for better things, or to better ourselves. So lastly, I listed some resources that we give patients. Speak to family or friends. Many times, if you're struggling, somebody around you has already noticed. They're just afraid to ask you about it. So speak up. Speak to a family member, a friend, your primary care physician. If you're not comfortable doing that, there's multiple other options. You can, if you're really in crisis, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. With technology now, there's also options of texting and being able to speak to somebody from a crisis line, or being able to call, or you can even use Twitter now. So I hope this has been helpful for everybody and really educational. And then, as I said, my last thing is, if you're struggling, ask for help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciate it. I know personally a good night's sleep and a hot shower can do a world of wonders. So I'm glad you mentioned those as just really simple, basic ways of grounding yourself every day and taking time. A good night's sleep makes everything feel a little bit better the next day. But I think you've given some great reminders that we're not alone. And if you're someone that's struggling, you're not alone. And there are a lot of resources at your fingertips that you can reach out for. So I love some of those great reminders. The group that Nicole mentioned, Norton Behavioral Medicine, works closely with our Norton Healthcare primary care providers. If you feel like this is a team that you would like to connect to, please make sure you speak to your Norton Healthcare primary care provider, and they can connect you to Norton Behavioral Medicine for some follow-up care if you feel like you need it. That particular team, Norton Behavioral Medicine, and our next speaker comes from Pastoral Care, but both of those teams have been two of the main contributors for our Norton Healthcare COVID support resources. You can imagine that a system that treats a large number of patients in our community, but also one of the largest employers, has needed support services. Both of these teams were integral in establishing the Norton Healthcare Social Support Services line, but also our employee support line. So both of these teams, the team that Nicole comes from and our Pastoral Care that our next speaker does as well, have been on the front line of supporting those who are coping with the effects of the pandemic. So this is not new to them, and they definitely have walked the road with a lot of patients and our employees. Next up from that team, our Pastoral Care team, we have Amy Helwig. Amy has a bachelor's in international affairs and also a master's in divinity. She has served as a chaplain for Norton Healthcare since 2004, and she currently serves patients in our Norton Medical Group practices and also our outpatient clinics. She also supports our Norton Healthcare employees who have had COVID-19, and again has been on the front line of walking with our providers who are handling the emotional effects of this pandemic. Amy does have two grown daughters. One is actually a nurse with us in our Norton Cancer Institute, so she's keeping it in the Norton family. But she also has one who is the director of culinary training with Biscuit Belly. Yum, I'm sure she's got some great recipes. She also has a love of her life, her 3-year-old granddaughter, who she just adores, but also her loving husband, who is a fellow foodie and loves to cook, which is one of Amy's favorite pastimes. Tonight, to give us a little bit more about the emotional and maybe spiritual side of your recovery to COVID is Miss Amy Helwig.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here with you. As Lauren said, I've been with Norton Healthcare since 2004. I worked in 2 hospitals, at Norton Women and Children's from 2004 to 2012, primarily with mother-baby patients and families. And then at Norton Audubon Hospital, I was with the cardiac intensive care and a couple of other step-down floors. And my work with Norton Medical Group since last December, gosh, it's already over a year, December 2020, really began with conversations with employees who are on furlough and experiencing long-haul COVID symptoms. And it was a very informative, gratifying work to walk with people who were trying very hard to get back to work and regain their sense of balance and health. Let me start by talking about the mission of Norton Healthcare Pastoral Care is to promote spiritual health, initiate timely, competent, compassionate, and as appropriate confidential spiritual care to patients, their families, and to staff. And we also train pastoral practitioners in the caring art. So we have residents and intern chaplains that we mentor and educate and mentor. Wanted to start with this prose by Victoria Erickson, who has written a book called Rhythms and Roads. This is a picture I took during the recent lunar eclipse. It was a beautiful night and it felt great to be outside. I think it talks about our connection to nature is so important when we're going through chaotic times. So this prose says, so many feel lethargic, unmotivated, or worn out in this hemisphere. We are really not made to rocket straight through winter, ablaze with energy. Look at nature. The ground and plants and animals are deep at rest. This is the natural way of things. Spend some time with the long nights, the moon, solitude, the bare earth, stillness, and be easier with yourself. One of the things that we do in our spiritual care of patients and families and employees is to really talk about, we're also holistically minded and part of the holistic approach to healthcare. And as part of a organization that's had a long faith tradition, faith heritage, we address spiritual needs of everybody, people who have grown up in a faith tradition, people who have no faith tradition. People are questioning what they believe or don't believe, but belief or practice is not really the issue. The issue is we each have an inner self, a soul that responds, just like our bodies and minds do. Our spirit responds to what we're going through. And so I like this prose because it's a reminder that it's been a long road that we've been on, as Nicole said, it's been a roller coaster. And my question is, do we know where we're going really on this long road? It's still uncertain. We don't know when the journey is going to end. If it ends, we certainly are going to end up in a different place that we thought we were going to be. Some of it's really positive. As Nicole reminded us, there's some good things that have come out of the pandemic, but there's a lot of loss too, and a lot of change and uncertainty that's hard to live with for a long time. And our rhythm is hard to find when our reality is changing so quickly. When we've got staff members out and we're covering for 2 or 3 people who are out, and everybody's scrambling to try to maintain our excellence in healthcare, which we're committed to deeply, but we don't have enough people, or we don't have enough resources at that moment. All of those things create what we call spiritual crises sometimes. And so learning to manage those feelings, those that sense of like, I don't know where we're going, is it's part of our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual well-being. I've kind of come to believe that our new job during the pandemic is learning to manage chaos because the sand is shifting all the time. So one of the things I learned as I was talking with people who are experiencing long haul symptoms was I'm going to keep asking the question, what help do long haulers need? Clearly health services, also financial and supplemental support. I've talked to so many people, patients, family members, employees who can't get right back to work in 3 weeks. Maybe it's 6 weeks, maybe it's 8 or 12 weeks, maybe they lose a job because of the pandemic. So suddenly the financial picture becomes very different, and depending on who you're supporting, that can really be a crisis. There have been people who've lost homes, employees, other patients and their families who, because of getting behind in payments, have lost their housing. There's legal and social help needed as well. It's been really hard for families with special needs kids, for example, because they don't have the normal in-person supports that they've been used to. And that's been a challenge. So getting the help and the respite care that they need at times has been a struggle. So we see a certain level of stress in the healthcare system when we see people in the clinic. But if you talk and go a little bit deeper about what's going on behind that story, there's even more. Fred Rogers, one of my favorite quotes is, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." That was one of his favorite things his mother taught him. And I really think that's important for all of us to remember. There are helpers around us. And sometimes for those of us who have been strong, type A, energetic, caregiving people, which many of us in healthcare are, it is hard to be a person who needs to ask for help. So having courage to look around and say, okay, this is my time that I need help. I can be a little bit vulnerable and ask, because that's what we do for one another. Also, I love this quote from Mary Van Geffen: "You are a non-renewable resource and worthy of great care." And we have to be well if we're going to take care of others. I often work with units, nursing units or practices, and do a little staff care. And when I have one-on-one conversations with people who are in the caring arts, I'll ask, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Well, I'm taking care of everybody else. And they'll name the 10 or 15 people that are leaning on them for care. And, you know, you kind of go, well, at some point, where are you going to take some time out for yourself? Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to keep this up. So in that sense, chaplains, our pastoral care team, can be a bridge to mental health service, behavioral health services. We can be a bridge to other healthcare services or community resources. We also have access to some of the social network information that the behavioral health team does. And so we all are in the same pool and work together in a complementary way to support our employees and our patients. Long haulers need emotional and spiritual support. So sometimes it's just moral support and encouragement. Somebody's got to say, you can do this hard thing. Okay, you're not getting well as quickly as you thought you would. I've talked a person who stands out as a young man who he was used to other people in his family being sick, but he never got sick. And here he is, a young dad, and he's not able to recover very quickly from his COVID symptoms. So he goes back to work and he's having heart palpitations, and, you know, he's struggling and has to not be the one that jumps in on a code blue, because he can't do that right at that moment, right when he goes back to work. Eventually he can, but the sense of needing, when you've been a healthy, strong person, needing to be patient with your recovery and walk through all the steps your long haul clinic folks are asking you to do to recover, when it seems so hard just to breathe, is really daunting. So having people around for moral support and encouragement can make a huge difference, and reminding you that this is probably not going to last forever, and we can help you get through this. Even while people are unwell, it's important for them to identify their own strengths. They may not feel as strong as they used to, but they still have strengths and they're still contributing. They're still a good mom, a good wife, a good husband. They still, there are things they can do. Instead of focusing on the things they can't do, they need help being reminded of what they are able to do. And what are the barriers to their getting well? Are there things that they've not asked for help for that are keeping them fatigued? Where if someone could step in and help with meals or with child transport, they might get better quicker if they could take that time and rest a bit. And then also just goal setting, personal goal setting. it's as simple as, this day I'm going to get up and do the walk around the block, or I'm going to make myself a meal. So I think people with long haul COVID are kind of thrust into a chronic illness situation, probably for a short time, we hope. But when you've not been a person with chronic illness, it's a whole new identity to adjust to. And so just kind of coming to terms with, this is where I am right now. I wasn't there a month ago before I got sick. I may feel angry about it. I may feel a sense of loss of not being able to do what I've always done, but I can cope and I can get through this. Like Nicole, we're always listening for what is anyone who's dealing with a chronic illness or long haul COVID. What are the barriers to their getting well? They may need application assistance for disability or for their, short-term leave. They may need childcare help. They may have trouble getting to their healthcare services with transportation or their schedule, anybody else's schedule. And a lot of the people in our community still don't speak very good English, and they have a difficult time communicating. So we have to remember that as well. I like this quote from, it's a website called Witchy Moms, but I love this. What if I took a new approach to self-care? What if I talked to myself the same way I talk to dogs? Hey, sweet girl, look at that beautiful belly. You're so clever. Want a treat? So sometimes I have found if it's a tough day and you need a little lift, look for things online that kind of encourage you, make you smile, kind of think a little bit differently about your situation and how you're doing. Social media can be a detriment, but it also can be a helper. And so finding those things that, remind you, hey, I can just say, hey, you're doing okay today. From our system, long haulers need guidance on using employee benefits. And this could be our employees or people who are our patients and clients. Employee benefits sometimes are not, they're there, the information's there. Sometimes we just don't know which place to go to for that information. So sometimes a person who is able just to guide you through, okay, on this website, where do I get information about this particular benefit? And I have more questions, who do I go to? Education about what company resources are available is another issue that, I find people need. I've been with groups of employees and said, do you know about our EAP program? Do you know about the emotional support line? Do you know about our emergency financial assistance? And they're like, no, I didn't know about that. Well, let me point you to where that's available, where that information is available, and here's how you access it. Sometimes, especially getting ready to come back to work or navigating life circumstances, people need some individual coaching. And this is a little different than therapy. It's really the kind of pointing in the right direction here and there. And as Nicole said, sometimes it can take a long time to get into a therapist. So, there are people, there are helpers in our system, chaplains and others who are bridges to that time when you can get in and do the other work that you need to do. When our system is, I think I'm proud of Norton Healthcare for being advocates for our employees, our patients and families in the broader context of what's going on at the state level, what's going on nationally. So that advocacy really means a lot to us. And if our needs aren't being advocated for, we need to let our folks know. So we've got an inclusion and diversity office that's really good. And we have these employee resource groups that are excellent. You can find that on our Insight portal. But there's advocacy going on for lots of different groups of people. And it's important for us to speak up and let our leaders know what's not being advocated for. That's how changes are made. That's how the Institute for Health Equity came about. And, those are the kinds of things that helps us both individually and as a community. So I wanted to point out these resources that are here for your benefit from Norton Healthcare. So there's a site that's been developed on Insight called the Norton Way to WellBeing. And I've listed the categories that are there, and different departments, different areas of practice have contributed to each of these categories. So one's called work-life balance. There's health, financial well-being, emotional health, family life, spiritual well-being, social well-being, and self-care. And you'll find resources now, but these resources will be expanded to over time. So keep going back, and just like we use our In Good Health information for education, this is another source of self-education and self-awareness. And chaplains are available for conversation support anytime. So the employee emotional support line is staffed Monday through Friday during regular working hours. And the chaplains really pick that up after hours if someone needs an immediate conversation or immediate help. So these are the numbers. You can call any of the hospital's operators and just ask to speak to a chaplain, and they will get a hold of either the person that's on call or someone else, and they'll get back to you. So, and we're prepared to refer to the behavioral health team or other community resources as needed. So another thing that long haulers need, especially as they're preparing for going back to work, is a plan for re-entering the workforce. So it can seem daunting if someone's been out for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and is really unsure about how strong they are for doing a whole shift or keeping their whole schedule up. For them to be in conversation with leaders and teammates regarding a light versus a regular duty reentry. And I know from conversations with our employees that our occupational medicine physicians and the long haul clinic team have been very helpful with those kind of assessing where you are physically and what is best and possible. And finally, we all need to be welcomed. And so when a person has been out for a while, if the unit is able to have a welcoming back activity or just treats out or a time just for each other to say hello, glad you're back. And for the person who's been out to say, thank you for covering for me while I've been out. It's a two-way street. And we know it takes all of us to hold the ship up. And so when someone's out for a while, it's really felt. And so welcoming back and re-cementing relationships is so important. So you have helped so many people. Each of us has helped so many people. And I just want to reiterate that it is okay to for family, friends, and colleagues to return the favor to you. That's what community and positive relationships are all about. And I know that when we give care and love, it comes back many, many times to us. So Pastoral Care is very interested in knowing what your story is. Individually, we've all had experiences through the pandemic that are varied and particular to your work, your responsibilities, your personal life. So we have found that sometimes storytelling can help unload the emotional toll of stressful situations. And so we want to invite people to practice this approach to supporting emotional and spiritual health. So we encourage everyone to share their COVID-19 stories as they feel motivated. So some of the questions that you could reflect on is, what have been your greatest challenges during the pandemic? What moments brought you unexpected joy? And are you right now tired, stressed, or anxious? And how do your current feelings compare with other points during the pandemic? And last but not least, who or what has helped you to carry on? Is it a routine? Is it a person? Is it colleagues? I mean, what has really helped you get to where you are right now? and think about what's going to help you going forward. So if you care to spend some time putting your story together, you can either call this number 629-2686 and leave a voicemail message, kind of like the Moth Story Hour does on public radio. They invite you to do that. Or you can email your story to keepfaith@nortonhealthcare.com. And if you just want to share your story privately, let us know that. If you're okay with sharing part of your story or the whole thing, you can also let us know that too. So finally, for all of us, whether it's during a pandemic or after the pandemic, I think it's important to remember that our lives are filled with meaning and purpose. And that's part of what we do in pastoral care, is to help people connect to their sense of meaning and purpose so that you feel like there's a trajectory in your life. So to stay connected to that, continue to ponder, what is it that brings you joy? What gives you hope? And how will you continue to build your resilience? Which tools do you use? Which helpers do you go to? And know that you are always invited to ask for help. I'm going to give my contact information. That's my email, amy.helwig@nortonhealthcare.org, or you can get a hold of me by phone by calling our department secretary, and her name is Patty, and her number is 502-629-2103. That's it for me. I thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's been quite, I would say, in my 17 years of chaplaincy, the last 2 have been completely unique and very life-giving and draining at the same time. And I'd be interested to hear what your experiences are too.
Thank you, Amy, so much. That had so many good tidbits as reminders. I love what you said at the end of just having those 3 questions. What brings you joy? What gives you hope? And how are you continuing to build resiliency? I feel like I should write that on my mirror or put it on a postcard in my car, or just something that I look at daily.
Yeah.
Definitely words to live by and us all to focus on. So thank you so much for sharing some of those. Also, you brought to light so many resources. Don't be afraid, if you are watching this presentation, to scroll back and take notes on some of her resources. Both Amy and Nicole offered so many great resources, and sometimes when you are in the thick of it, just knowing where to go, it can be so overwhelming to navigate. And so that was really our goal here tonight, is offer you up resources at whatever stage you're at, whether you're at the beginning or in the thick of it, or gosh, you're exhausted, whatever it might be, there's a resource to kind of fit you. And so I think Amy and Nicole did a great job of that. Don't feel afraid to go back and rewind and look for those slides. This presentation will be put up on our COVID comeback site, which is nortonhealthcare.com/COVID comeback. Our previous sessions of this class as well are on there. And there's loads of information from just what to expect as part of your journey from a medical perspective, how to get back to exercise or just movement, as Nicole said. And then this will add to that journey as well. So feel free to go back and look at those episodes. You can also share them with a friend. Our goal is to just be a support for those going through it, whether you're a patient of Norton Healthcare, a member of our community, or beyond. So feel free to share this as you see fit. Thank you so much on behalf of the entire Norton Healthcare team, Amy and Nicole. We always appreciate having experts like you on. We thank you for your service and thank you for being there day in and day out. I love to see people like you pour their heart into their work. So we always appreciate it. As always, Norton Healthcare is dedicated to trying to care for your mind, body, and spirit. Tonight, we touched on 2 of the 3 in a way that most people don't think of us. So we hope you found that tonight. Please check back with us. We'll continue to put out content, especially as it relates to helping you through this tough season and beyond. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time.